were the Irish and the Italians really considered non-white in America? Were the Irish and Italians really considered non-white in America? What race were there? Why not white, and when and how did they become white? So look, the Irish and Italians obviously are European people, right? No question about that. So see, in the US, there's we have to look at it from two perspectives. There is something called legal race. Okay, the Americans had something called legal race. So in American law, white meant European. No matter what part of Europe you came from, you were legally white if you were a European. And Irish and Italians obviously counted as white because they from the very start in American law, because they were from Europe. So legally they were white. They were eligible for naturalization. Okay, and they were never barred as a race the way Asians or Africans were. Not Africans. Africans were slaves, but Asians were barred from immigrating into the US and becoming naturalized citizens. Italians and Irish were not barred like that. So legally they were white. But there is something called social status or social race, racialized status. So in everyday life, so despite being legally white, in everyday life, the Italian and Irish people were portrayed as a different or inferior kind of white person. They were often compared to Africans and non-white races, and they were described as being somehow lesser than proper white people, biologically lesser, morally lesser, culturally lesser than the Nordic people. Okay, so they were racially stigmatized. They were treated as if they were white, but not quite white. Okay, that sort of thing. They were not legally non-white in the way that black people or Asian people were. So why is this so? So in the 19th century racial thinking in the Western world, Europe was split into multiple races. See, from an Indian or non-European perspective, we see the white people as one people, right? White people. You don't see Russians as non-white, do you? You don't see the French and the Germans being two different kinds of white. You see them all as white people. But in their perspective, okay, Europe was divided into various races. You had the Anglo-Saxons, you had the Nordic people, Anglo-Saxons, Celtic people, Slavic people, the Mediterranean races, and so on. And each of these was ranked differently in a hierarchy. Okay, so the Irish. So one of the things about the Irish people, there are two. This is an oversimplification, but if you visit Ireland, there are two kinds of Irish people. There's the red-headed Irish, and there's the black Irish. What's black Irish? You have some Irish people who've got jet black hair, right? So you've got Irish with fair hair, and you've got Irish with black hair. So there's two kinds of Irish even in Ireland, and that's a whole different story. So the Irish were not considered to be Anglo-Saxons or Nordic. They were considered to be Celtic people, and they obviously are Celtic people. And the stereotype was that Celtic people are less intelligent, they are more hot-tempered, intemperate, and the Celtic people are naturally suited for servile labor. And they are naturally differential to their superiors, to their betters, who are the Anglo-Saxons and the Nordics. Okay, and you had all these terrible cartoons and caricatures that depicted Irish people with comparing them with monkeys, essentially, that sort of thing, comparing them with black people also, and so on, that sort of thing. And the Italians, they were obviously not Celtic, but they are part of the what was considered to be the Mediterranean race, which is a darker race. Okay, and it was believed that they are closer to the Asian people or to Africans, but not. They are very, very different from the Nordic and Anglo-Saxon people. They're not really white. I mean, if you go to Greece today, for example, okay, Italy, Greece, neighboring regions, you go to Greece today, maybe 4 to 5% of Greek people have blonde hair. And that too, not the Nordic blonde, but the dishwater blonde, dark blonde. Maybe 4 to 5% of Greek people have blonde hair. The overwhelming majority of Greek people have dark hair. When it comes to blue eyes, maybe 5 to 10% of Greek people have blue eyes or green eyes or gray eyes. The rest of Greek people, more than 10%, have brown eyes. And the Greek skin color, well, it's closer to Persia and Western India, than to Europe, than to the, the white European ideal, Nordic or Anglo-Saxon ideal. So clearly, the Italians and the Greeks are more brown than white. So there was that also. Then there's religion. Okay, religion is an issue, because the Irish and the Italians were Catholic, but the country, the United States, was a strongly Protestant country. The roots from the Mayflower and whatnot were strongly Protestant roots. And the Catholics, well, there was this anti-Catholic sentiment. So Catholics were considered to be more superstitious than the Protestants, less industrious than the Protestants, more violent than the Protestants, and so on. And once again, the Irish and the Italians, their languages, obviously native languages, were different. Their accents in English were different, and so on. Their customs were also foreign, and so on. So there are these issues. And then you have, the Irish and the Italians were poor people. They were new immigrants, and they competed for the poor jobs, the working man's job and all that. And that led to friction and competition and so on, which is an issue. And they were typically engaged in work that black laborers would do, that sort of thing. They would work in fields, they would work in dockyards, they would work in small businesses, typically in places where black people would work. So they were associated with black people, that sort of thing. So because of this, you had this issue that the Irish and the Italians were regarded as perhaps in the Americas, the lowest class of white people. Eventually, what happened in the late 19th century, 20th century, Irish men started gaining power in politics, urban politics. They started becoming parts of police forces. They became parts of labor unions, especially in cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia. Okay, they became insiders in white urban power structures. Italians moved from the low skilled trades into highly skilled trades, shopkeeping, various businesses and occupations, and so on. So overall, they started rising in social status, and so on. And they obviously consciously decided to distance themselves from the black people. Maybe they became even more racist towards black people than the other whites were. And that's how eventually things changed. So that's how they became white, so to say. And eventually what happens is that people assimilate, there are intermarriages between Anglo-Saxons and Irish people, Anglo-Saxons and Italian people. And eventually the race distinctions dissolve. So eventually that's what happened. So that's how the Irish and the Italians were considered kind of non-white, and they faced a lot of discrimination, persecution, oppression, whatever. But eventually they were able to overcome these hardships.